Welcome to this brand new module of Church Fuel 1. In today's masterclass, we're going to talk about how 3 key moments in your weekend worship service can help your service just go to the next level. So let's dive into this practical training. As always, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to work on the church and not just in the church. And at Church Fuel 1, we're all about helping you lead a healthy and growing church. We don't believe those two things are competing with each other. We believe both should happen in your church. We want your church to be healthy, but we also want your church to grow. And one of the common denominators that we all have as pastors is that we believe in the local church. We believe in what we're doing. In fact, a lot of you watching this video today, you could make more money, you could have a much easier life if you did something else, but you're called and compelled to serve in the local church. And so today, I want to talk to you about the church service. This is something that is so important, and I'm very passionate about this topic because I as a leader of Church Fuel 1, serving pastors and helping pastors, I get to go to a lot of church services, and I love it. Go to church services of all different traditions, all different styles, small churches, big churches, mega churches, rural churches, all over the place. And I love the diversity that's in the kingdom of God. But no matter what style or what location or where your building is, your church service is something that is so important to the ministry, the overall ministry of your church. And so one of the ways I like to think about this is the church service is kind of like that, 4.5-yard carry that the running back makes. I went to Florida State University, and I was there in the times where FSU was winning national championships, and we had work done, and right after primetime Deion Sanders, and it was awesome. It was like the heyday of college football in the state of Florida. And I remember the offense at Florida State just had this awesome offense, and they run around. But when you think about football, if you have a running back and an offensive line that can get 4 to 5 yards every time they carry the ball, you're going to win a lot of games. 4-yard carries don't usually make SportsCenter. 4 or 5-yard carries don't usually make the highlight reel. But if your running back and your offensive line can consistently produce 4 to 5 yard just running plays, right up the middle, toss sweeps, whatever they are, you're going to win a lot more games. The Hail Marys, the trick plays are awesome. That's what gets on SportsCenter. But the 4 to 5 yard carries is what helps you win the game. And so this idea of running the ball, just being consistent, I think about your church service. Your church service is like that 4 to 5 yard carry. You have 52 times a year. You don't have to hit a home run. I know I'm mixing metaphors. You don't have to hit a home run. You don't have to have an amazing trick play. You don't have to blow everybody's socks off. You just need a 4 to 5 yard carry every single time. So your church service happens 52 times a year, and it doesn't nearly get the focus as some of your special events that happen just once. I've been in churches where there's events like a women's ministry event, and there are committees, and there are dozens and dozens of volunteers, and there's printed things, and there's decorations, and there's events, and there's speakers, and there's all this stuff, and all this energy goes into planning this event that happens one time a year. But the church service that happens 52 times a year, and by far will attract the most visitors to the church, rarely gets any planning, rarely gets any evaluation. It rarely gets any focus. And so today, in our training today, I want to just bring the service, the ordinary, boring, happens every week, comes around every 7 days, church service to the forefront. And I want to talk about 3 moments that can happen in every church service that if you plan them with intentionality, it'll immediately make your church service better. And I really believe that when the church service gets better, there's a trickle-down effect that affects guests, it affects retention, it affects assimilation, it affects discipleship, it affects evangelism and giving and everything else in your church. So I want to talk about 3 moments that you can focus on this weekend and this month in your church service. So let's dive in. The first moment that I want to encourage you to focus on, to streamline, to really make it really good, is the welcome. The welcome. Now, if you've ever flown on an airplane, you've seen this in a non-church environment. Because every time I get on a plane, and I fly a lot of Delta flights because I leave out of Atlanta and go to all different places. And so when I get on the Delta plane, there's always a moment where on the plane where somebody, it's either on a video or it's sometimes in person, sometimes somebody comes over the little speaker, and they basically tell you how to use the plane. They tell you what to do, how to fasten your seatbelt, They tell you how long the flight's going to be. They tell you if there's an emergency, where the exits are. They're basically giving you an orientation to the flight. And it happens every single flight. You could be on a flight where there's 50 people and all of them have flown 100 times before. They're still going to give you the same speech. What is that? Why is that orientation so important? Because they know that it could be somebody's first day. They know that a welcome, that a flight attendant speech, that kind of speech, it sets the tone for the flight. And the welcome in your church, this welcome segment, a 1 to 2 minute kind of a little speech deal where somebody comes out and does a very brief orientation of what's going to happen today, it can set the tone for your service. So what I want to do is I want to show you an example of a welcome. And then I want to talk about the qualities that should be in every welcome. So let's watch this.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope you guys are doing great. Welcome to our 9 o'clock service at Watermark. If you are here for the very first time, we are glad that you are here. My name is Gavin. I'm the lead pastor here at Watermark Church. Let me tell you a little bit about our church and what we're going to do today, in case you don't know. Our mission at Watermark is just really simple. We want to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus. This morning, we'll be together for right about an hour. We're going to get to sing some great songs, and Ryan and Dee Dee are going to lead us in our time of music. If you don't know the words, don't worry. The lyrics will be on the screens, and if you have a really bad singing voice like me, don't worry again, because the music will be loud enough that nobody will leave the building because of you. So feel free to sing as loud as you want. Also, we are closing our series today, Ask It with Andy Stanley. So if you have missed any of the other pieces of this series, as always, we would love for you to go online to watermarkchurch.com/messages, and you can watch any of our previous messages there for free. Also, next week, we're beginning a brand new local series called You're Invited, and I would love to invite you to come back next week for that as well. Hey, there's a lot of great things going on. We gave you a bulletin when you came in, has some great information in it. Let me just share a couple of those. One, today, we are getting ready right now to launch our new small groups called access groups, or short-term groups. Short-term groups are very similar to our long-term groups, except they are shorter, right? You guys already knew that. You're so smart. So they're shorter, but they're really topically driven. So if you are not in a small group, we would love for you to consider being a part of one of our short-term small groups. You can learn more online if you go to the website, watermarkchurch.com/short-term groups. And you can read all about the offerings that we're going to have coming up this spring. We'd love for you to consider being a part of one of those. Also, a lot of you today parked at our brand new second off-site parking lot at Sixes Elementary. If you see people walk around with a sticker on, tell them thank you for parking at Sixes. You're the reason that I got to have a great parking space at church today. So we are glad that you did that. Isn't it cool that we go to a church where we have to have multiple off-site parking lots? Isn't that awesome? So we're pumped about that. Thank you for parking at our second lot if you did that today. Also, last thing to tell you, today we're going to get to celebrate life change through baptism. We have Adam this morning who's come, and we're going to get to celebrate his story and celebrate baptism with him. We think baptism is a huge step in the life of a believer. It's the way that we publicly identify with Jesus and really his death and burial and resurrection. And so we're going to get to celebrate that today. If you have any questions about baptism, we would love to answer those. You can ask any of our staff members or go online. We have great information there available as well. All right, hey, we are ready to do a little bit of singing, and Ryan and Dee Dee are going to lead us in our time of music. So as they come up, I'd love for you to stand up, find somebody with a parking sticker on, and just tell them thank you for your great parking space today.
So that's a great example of a welcome. It's just a very simple moment, but it was planned with a lot of intentionality. There were some good things that happened in that moment that set the tone for the day. So when you're going to have a welcome in your service, and I think you should have an element like that this week, I think you should plan it out. I think you should figure out what it's going to say. And there are a few things that I think every welcome should have. First of all, I think every time you do this, every time you gather, when you do a welcome, and you should do this every time you have a church service, you should say the mission and or the vision of the church. Tell people why the church is here. Don't assume everybody knows it. Tell people why you are gathered. Tell them why you're here. And so state the mission and vision. Number 2, let people know what to expect. So if you're here today for the first time, here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going down. Somebody's going to come up and preach, and we're talking about the book of Ephesians, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Or we're going to sing some songs, or just tell people what's going on. Don't assume that everybody knows what's happening. One of my favorite things that I love that my church does is they typically tell you in the welcome how long the service is going to last. Because if you're new to church, if it's your first time there, that is a question that you're wondering. How long is this going to last? So just tell people. And then number 3, let new people know what to do. Don't assume that everybody knows what's going on. Just like Delta does, they always tell you how to use the seatbelt. They always tell you how to use the exits. They always tell you about the flotation device. They don't assume that everybody knows what to do. They always explain. So your welcome segment, 1 to 2 to 3 minutes, maybe you have an announcement in there or whatever, but get that segment, practice it. Make it good, make it quality, and make it outsider focused. Now here's kind of a pro tip. This is a little pro tip for you. Let somebody engaging do the welcome, right? Let somebody that's good at this get up front and talk about it. It doesn't have to be the senior pastor. It doesn't have to be a staff member. You may have a really engaging volunteer in your church. You may have somebody that is just a natural up in front of people, but they're not ever going to preach a sermon or teach a class. But you could have them do the welcome segment and they'd be really, really, really good at it. This is an opportunity to involve some different people in a pretty public way. And so get somebody who's personable, who's funny. Think talk show host. Let them up there to do the welcome. Add some humor, add some personality, and add some intentionality to the welcome. So the first thing I want to encourage you to work on in your church service is the welcome. Every church service needs that welcome segment. That's like a 4 or 5 year run and play. And just practice it and get good at it, film it, critique it, make it really, really, really good. That's number one. Number two, the second element, the second moment that I think every church service should have is what I call the offering setup. The offering setup. So here's the deal. Here's how this works. Almost every church service I've been to, from mega church to like 25 people in the room, and I've been to all of them, almost every single one of them has some type of moment where they receive an offering. Because that's how most churches are funded, right? They pass a plate or they have some boxes in the back and they tell people to use them. I mean, churches are funded by the gifts of the people. So there's a moment in a church service where you're going to receive an offering. And this moment's really, really important because without it, there won't be any other moments in your church, right? So let's just being practical. That moment is very important because it's the moment that helps all the other moments exist and happen. That's how the building gets paid for. It's how the staff gets paid for. It's how ministry gets paid for. It's how outreach gets paid for. The offering is really important in your service. So back up. If the offering's really important, doesn't it deserve some intentionality and focus? Couldn't you take that time, instead of just tacking it onto a worship set or tacking it onto the end of the service or just kind of making it a necessary evil that you've got to get through? What if you redeemed that time and actually made it purposeful? What if you actually took that time and you planned it out and you made it good? See, the offering time is one of the most mismanaged and underplanned parts of the service. But it has the opportunity to actually influence your church's ministry all throughout the year. So I've been to a lot of different church services and I've seen all these people, right? I've seen the mumbling deacon. Have you ever seen the mumbling deacon? Now, I remember going to a church where they would actually have the deacons who were going to pass the little felt-lined offering plates down the rows would actually come forward and they would have an offertory prayer. And one of the deacons, right, if you were the deacon of the week, you got to pray for the offering. And a lot of times this deacon would just kind of mumble a prayer and nobody in the room could hear what was going on, and then they'd pass the plates. And I just think of every time I see that happen, I think of the mumbling deacon who is probably praying a great prayer, but no one can hear him because he doesn't have a microphone. He's just kind of praying some stuff and it's his turn. And so the mumbling deacon, that's not really inspirational. That's not really intentional. Then I've seen this in a lot of churches, the rambling worship leader. Have you seen this? This is where it's the worship leader's job to transition from the singing kind of to the offering, and then the sermon's going to come. So the worship leader gets to the end of the song and he's still playing the guitar a little bit. Maybe there's some piano in the background or whatever. And the worship leader just kind of mumbles this prayer about kind of God's faithfulness and goodness, and it's kind of tied to the song that was just sang. Sometimes it's a real awkward transition, like where they try to use a line of the song and make it fit. And this worship leader who obviously didn't really think through this moment, but this responsibility fell to him or her, and prays this prayer or says this kind of thing that's kind of not always right, and then all of a sudden we're taking up the offering. But by far the most common person that I see set up the offering is the invisible man. The invisible man. And here's what I mean by the invisible man. There's just nothing. There's no intentionality. It's like we're going to receive the offering now, and boom, we're receiving the offering. I mean, there's no intentionality. There's no focus. And it's just like we just skip over this moment. But here's what I want to encourage you to do. Just like you get intentional with the welcome, let's get intentional with the offering setup by explaining to people what's going on. Here's the deal. It's okay to ask people to give. I mean, you're passing the plate. You're asking them to give. It's not friendly to just pass a plate with no context. It's not friendly to ask people to give or expect people to give or even offer people the opportunity to give if you don't tell them what's going to happen. So it's okay to ask people to give. Also, you don't want to assume that people know what to do. You don't want to assume that just when you pass a plate by, everybody knows how to participate. Always explain the offering. And so let me give you a pro tip. A pro tip here is you can keep this fresh. You can keep this fresh by mixing it up. You can keep this moment, you can plan this moment to say, okay, how are we going to keep this, how are we going to explain the offering? How are we going to ask people to give? What creatively can we do? And so here's some ways that you can make this explanation meaningful and not like a mini sermon. Here's 4 ways that you can make this offering setup really good and creative and not feel like it's just guilt laying it on to people every week to tell them to participate. So the first thing you can do is you can share a story. You can just share a story about what God's doing in your church. And then you connect the story to the giving. And you can thank people. You can say, hey, that story is such a great story. And when you give, you're actually making it possible for us to hear stories like that. So thank you. And when you give, which you're about to have the opportunity to do that right now, you're giving so that we can hear more stories like that. So you can share a life change story. You can share a story about something that your church did in the community. You can share a story about something somebody learned. You can share a personal story that you've heard throughout the week or the month. You can share a story. Stories are great ways to highlight the time of giving and to highlight the offering in your church. Here's another thing you can do. You can use a prop. One time while I was pastoring a church in Atlanta, I used the Monopoly game as a prop. And I brought out a Monopoly game, and I talked for a couple minutes, about 30 seconds or so, about how I love to play Monopoly, the houses, the hotels. And I talked about the game, and how, we had all this money. Everybody had money. And at the end of the game, somebody's got all the property. Somebody's got all the money. Somebody won, somebody lost. But really at the end of the game, what do? We take the little greenhouses, we take the little hotels, we take all the money, and we put it back in the box. And I talked about how we go through life and we can try to acquire stuff, we can try to get rich, we can try to get money, but when it's all over, like when we die, it all goes back in the box. The game goes back in the box. And I used that Monopoly board as a prop, that Monopoly game that I held up in my hands to talk about how we have the opportunity to not just build houses and hotels and get all the little paper, gold $500 bills, but that we have an opportunity to invest in eternity. And so when you give, it's not about building our life now because that's going to just go back in the box when it's all done. It's about investing in people's lives for all eternity. It's a prop. And you see how just a little bit of creativity and a little bit of thought can emphasize and highlight the offering and actually turn it from this kind of mundane, gotta do it thing into this moment where it connects with people. So you can share a story. You can use a prop. Here's another thing. You can tell people where the money goes. You just tell people where the money goes. I remember one time I did this and I brought out a dollar bill and I said, this is $1. And I held it up. And I said, in just a few minutes, we're going to receive an offering, and a lot of people are going to put dollars in the offering plate. Maybe it's $1, maybe it's $20. Some of you gave digital dollars online, but this is $1. But before you give any dollars, I just want you to know what we're going to do with it. And then I had a graphic that I put up on the screen that just showed, I divided up the dollars, said this part goes to facilities, this part goes to staff, and the whole thing only took about 2 minutes. But I explained to people where the money went. And I had people afterwards come up to me after the service and say, thank you for just explaining that. We love it. We love it. And I found that when you explain, kind of open up, and you don't have to pass out the detailed budget and talk about how much money the assistant so-and-so makes. You don't have to do that. But when you just give a high-level picture of what you're doing with what you're asking people to give, it builds confidence. It builds trust. Another thing you can do is you can read a verse. Here, a simple way to highlight your offering is just to read a verse about generosity, to read a verse about giving, and to read a verse about how God loves a cheerful giver, and we're going to give cheerfully. You can just read a verse. So stories, props, sharing with people where the money goes, or sharing different numbers and things like that, or just Bible verses are simple ways to highlight. And you can rotate those around every month and keep it fresh. And so that's a great way to plan out the offering. So you've got the welcome. How are you going to make that intentional? You've got the offering set up. How are you going to make that intentional? And the third part of your service that I think really will help take your service to the next level is to plan out, number 3, is the next step. The next step. Here's the question to ask here is, okay, you're coming to the end of the service. What do you want people to do? What do you want people to do? Because too many times a church service, there's some music, there's a message. But when people go home, we're not actually asking them to do anything. So when you think through your sermon, or even bigger than that, your service, what do you want people to do as a result of being in church that day? What do you want people to do as a result of hearing the message that you preach to them? That's a great question to ask throughout the week as you're preparing your sermon and as you're planning the service. That's a great question to ask throughout the week. What's the next step for people? But it's definitely something to clarify as you get to the end of a sermon or the end of a service. What step do you want people to take? Now, here's something I've noticed. I've noticed that when we don't have a good next step, we default to asking people to think about something. And so think about it, pray about it. Hey, so this week we just talked for 30 minutes. We just were here for an hour. So this week, just think about this, is a very weak action step. It's the action step we choose when we don't really have an action step. It's the action step that we choose when we don't really have a focus throughout the week in our preparation, is we just tell people, hey, so think about this. But you can do better than that. I know you can do better than that, because with intentionality, you can lead people to take not 4, 5, 6 different steps, but to lead everything like a funnel, to funnel people toward taking a next step, something that they can do this week. And so here's the pro tip I want to give for you on the area of next step. Connect your service to your sermon. Connect your service to your sermon. Don't have random singing. Don't have random announcements. Don't have a random offering setup. And don't have a random action step. Connect it all together with planning. And you can do that. You can connect the dots for people. You can connect your next step of your church service to the next step of your sermon. But specifically ask people tell them, ask the question, what do I want people to do? And then answer it for them. And so it can literally be as simple as this. As you're winding down the message, as you're coming to the end of the service, you can say something like this. You can say, well, we've been here for about an hour. You've heard this message. We've looked at God's word. We've said, and you can say this out loud. You can say, so you're saying, Michael, what do you want me to do? Well, that's a great question. Here's one challenge that I have for you this week to implement what we talked about today. And then you lay out the one challenge. You lay out the next step, not a series of options for people, not a menu of choices for people, but what's the one next step? If you can get clear around that, to go, the next step of our service is this. If you can answer that, you're going to take your service to the next level. Now, let me give you some tips on how to implement what we talked about today. So we talked about getting clear on your welcome. We talked about getting clear on your offering setup. And we talked about getting clear on your next step or your call to action. So let me give you some tips. Okay, number 1, decide who owns each of these moments. Okay, decide who owns each of these moments. So you could say something like this. You could say, Jimmy, if you've got a guy named Jimmy, you can say, Jimmy, you're in charge of the next 4 offering moments. And here's some ideas. Here's what Michael talked about in this video. Here's some ideas. But you're in charge of doing them or finding somebody to do them with creativity, with intentionality. Here's a couple principles. Here's a couple guidelines. But you're in charge. Make our offering setups awesome. You're in charge. You can appoint a point person for that. You can appoint a point person for the welcome. To say, listen, we're going to have a welcome segment in the service. And rather than rumble through a bunch of things or make 17 different announcements, we want to get really good. These are the things we want to contain. Here's a great video example. You're in charge of doing them and or finding somebody engaging and funny and interesting to do them. You're in charge of that. So you can designate a point person over each of these areas. Tip number 2 to take action. Keep track of this on a spreadsheet. Now, in the resource library, I'm giving you a tool that we use, a communication tool, where you can keep track of all these parts of your service. This is where you can literally plan out in advance. You can go a month in advance or 2 months or 3 months in advance, and you can rotate around. You can have different emphasis. You can have different people. You can schedule different people, and it'll allow you just to plan in bulk all of this on a shared document so you can see what's going on. Maybe you use a tool like Planning Center Online. You can schedule these out in Planning Center Online, which is a great tool that we recommend. But if not, you can use this simple Excel document to plan out who's doing what in the service. And then tip number 3 to take action, practice. Practice them, right? I don't know if you knew this or not, but Saturday Night Live, they have Saturday Night Live. It comes on NBC on Saturday night and it's live. That's why they call it Saturday Night Live. But did you know that before that they actually have a practice? They bring in an audience earlier in the afternoon and they run through all the skits and they actually cut stuff and change stuff based on the practice and how it acts with a live audience. And they get rid of that audience, and when they do it live, there's a different audience. And so they actually practice the improv. They practice the live thing, and they make adjustments based on their practice. They bring in a different audience and they do it, and they still don't always get it right, but they practice. And so, listen, Saturday Night Live doesn't matter for eternity. Saturday Night Live isn't going to change anybody's life. It's a TV show and it's entertainment. What you're doing has the opportunity to impact people for eternity. So what if you just practice? I mean, you could practice. Somebody could look into a webcam on a computer and just practice the welcome and send it to you, and you could give them feedback. Somebody could stand up and practice the giving explanation, whether it's an object lesson or whether it's a story or whether it's a thing. You can have people practice these things. You can run through them before the service starts, before anybody comes into your auditorium. You can just practice these things, because when you practice them, you'll get better. So, the welcome, make it intentional. The giving setup, the offering setup, make it purposeful. And the next step that you want people to take, make it clear. Schedule all these things. Plan all these things. And here's what I believe will happen. If you get clarity around these 3 moments in your church service, that church service will be like a 4 or 5 yard football player, a 4 or 5 yard carry for the running back in the offensive line. And if you do that week after week after week, you're going to make your church not just bigger, but you're going to make it better. You're going to make your church healthy. You're going to help your church be healthy and growing at the same time by bringing intentionality to these 3 very, very, very important moments in your worship service. So, plan your moments. Plan this week's moments. Plan this month's moments. Just one step at a time. Plan these 3 moments in your worship service. Hey, listen, I hope your music is great. I hope your message is great. I hope all those things matter. Those things really matter. But these 3 moments, they're like the details. And if you can plan these transitions and these details, it'll help your church service get better. It'll be like a 4 or 5 yard carry. And it'll make a big difference in your church. So thanks for watching today. Implement, take action, go work on these moments, and make them matter in your church.